Greetings and welcome to the last video lecture for this chapter on personality disorders. When last we spoke, or I recorded, we were talking about psychopathy. We were talking about basically possible causes of it. And so I'm going to continue that a little bit. And that we're going to talk about the developmental perspective, how this may indeed develop or be created over time. So what could be going on? Well, it's possible that what's going on here in some ways is regulating emotion, too little or too much. That you're either regulating emotions, just what it sounds like. Too little, more antisocial personality disorder and antisocial. Sorry, that's redundant. You only need to write it down once. So if you don't regulate emotion enough, you get antisocial personality disorder. You basically get that very emotionally volatile, where someone is more about how they behave than how they feel. So yes, emotions everywhere. Too much, it's more psychopathy, in that you don't have, you've regulated emotions a little too much, and that you've regulated fear out of existence, perhaps, or regulated empathy, or regulated love, or regulated any sort of positive emotion toward any other individual far too much. May still have the negative. That way you can blame them for their own problems, sort of thing. But yes, the positive is definitely going to be over-regulated. There's also sociocultural factors that go into psychopathy. When we look at different cultures, because that's basically what we're talking about here, the affective and interpersonal contact tends to be most consistent across cultures, in that that's what we tend to see problems with in psychopathy, and also, well, we tend to see affective and interpersonal things most consistent in cultures anyway. But these are the symptoms that we tend to see across cultures. What's kind of interesting is that it's possible that the type of culture that the United States has, and much of the Western world has, may actually kind of push people toward being psychopaths. In that our cultures tend to be very, very individualistic. Now, there's the other type of culture that you can have is a collective culture. An individualistic culture, I talked about this a bit in class. An individualistic culture is one in which we value the individual over the group. We think that the individual is more important. We think, for instance, that if I am a typical member of an individualistic culture, I believe that if I am in a group, that I am still more important than the group. And so, therefore, it's individualistic. That's what's important. I may hesitate to sacrifice myself for a group, particularly if it's a bunch of people I don't know and who aren't related to me. On the other hand, collectivist cultures believe that the group is the most important thing, that the individuals don't really matter, but what matters is the survival of the group, whether it's a family, whether it's a business, whether it's a culture. It's the group that's important. And if the individual must sacrifice, then that has to be what happens. Of course, individualistic cultures say, screw you, I got mine. And quite frankly, the screw you, I got mine view of things is much more like antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy, in that it tends to reduce empathy, it tends to reduce the feelings toward other people, it tends to figure that the end justifies the means, that it's okay for me to screw people over in order to get what I want. Look at a lot of the movies we have. And the people that we value in the movies, the winners are the people that very often, not always, but very often, are the ones that basically can screw everybody else out of what is theirs. They're the winners. They're the tough people. They're the good people. They're not the wimps. They're not the losers. They're not the wusses. Okay? And so it's possible that our culture is actually kind of encouraging these sorts of psychological disorders, which is an interesting thing to think about, something to talk about in a late night bull session eventually. But yeah, definitely could be found more perhaps in our culture because we encourage it without knowing we're doing it. Treatment and outcomes. This is going to be a very short slide. Okay? Biological treatments don't seem to work. SSRIs, other types of medication don't seem to work. You can't punish people out of it. Remember, people who are psychopaths tend to focus on the reward and ignore or disregard the punishment. So you can't, punish people out of it. You take these people and you put them in jail, and they usually just, keep screwing people once they get out of jail. And actually, they will also screw people in the jail. They're just, it doesn't matter. They're the ones, they're in some ways, they're predators. And if they have to prey on other people, then, hey, you should be a predator too. You can't convince them to change, because this is probably one of the epitomes of the problems with the personality disorders. Psychopaths don't think there's anything wrong with them whatsoever. They think the problem is with everybody else. Again, like I was saying, why don't you behave like me? You could do it too. And then you'll be a winner and not a loser. So, they think that everyone should be more like them. And so trying to get somebody to change when they think that everyone should be more like them, that's very difficult. And when therapy does tend to work, remember, these are oftentimes very, very savvy people when it comes to reading others. And they're very good, for instance, at pretending, at acting like they have empathy, like they've been cured, like they're actually wonderful people. And then once they get out in public, they're back to being the predator. They know how to give people what they think the people want in order for that person to take what they want. And whether it's a partner, whether it's a friend, whether it's a therapist, they will do it. Not a problem. No qualms whatsoever. No empathy. No staying up late night worrying. None of that sort of stuff. The best thing to do with this, with psychopathy, and probably also for antisocial, and probably for all of the personality disorders when possible, is to try to stop it before it becomes firmly entrenched. To try, as I sometimes say, to head it off at the pass. If you're dealing, if you could find it in a child, try to fix it in a child. It'll be easier, because once it's allowed, to harden, once it's allowed to solidify, it's like trying to change the shape of concrete. Once it is hardened, it's a lot easier to mold it and shape it before you let it dry and cure. And so the idea here is to help, and by stopping it in children. Best of luck with identifying it in them, though. Talked about that a little bit in the last. I mean, it's very difficult to do this. It's very difficult sometimes to tell a future psychopath from a naughty kid. And you don't want to be taking naughty kids and putting them in intensive therapy when they don't need it. But then on the other hand, that's probably going to mean that you're going to let the odd psychopath through. Does the end justify the means? If you're a psychopath, it does. If you're a psychologist, or you're a teacher, or you're a parent, it's a lot harder.